So today's video is going to be on a man called Colin Pitchfork. He is a double child rapist and killer. I'm going to be going into a bit of detail about what he done to these little girls, because this subhuman creature is out. Don't know why. In the original court case, the experts said, even the judge said, you are not fit to be out in public and civilization. You are a danger and a risk. And yet, he's out. So, and people argue, you know, oh, well, he done his sentence. He done more than what he was sentenced to. And it's like, he should have got double. This man raped and murdered two little girls. Two little 15-year-old girls. So, I just wanted to do a bit of an introduction. They're on cards, so you might hear some shuffling of papers. I know that can be really annoying. I listen to a podcaster who uses like paper, and I love him, but like sometimes the paper, it can get a bit annoying, but I don't mind, he's still boss. So this case is infamous because it's the first crime caught with DNA. And I'll go a little bit more into the DNA aspects of it. But Colin Pitchfork, when he was 14, he was convicted of indecent exposure. And at the time of his arrest, he'd said to the police, I flashed more than 1,000 women. Now, flashing people, they get off on it because you do it to unsuspecting people who are not consenting to see you drunk. Now, apparently, after he murdered Linda Mann, he'd stopped flashing for about 6 to 8 months, but then the urge to do it returned again. So what he done when he was 14, he exposed his genitals, which made him sexually excited. And people that like to do this, they like the idea of people watching them and looking at them for some reason. I can't imagine anything worse. There is a thing, or there was a thing called exhibitionist disorder, and this is when it can cause harm to others. So acting upon urges or fantasies, or being distressed about being unable to function because the urges and fantasies are too much, which he does describe kind of, he sounds a bit like an addict, like that urge to just go and use, that urge to just go and expose himself. Now, most people who do flash people, they haven't got their disorder. Doctors will diagnose the disorder usually when a great deal of distress happens. So a lot of it is the distress that the person is feeling. And they'll diagnose it, they're more likely to diagnose it once they've actually gone out and exposed themselves to whoever, the, you know, usually women. Treatments offered after arrest include support groups, psychotherapy and antidepressants. So they're usually male, and the victims are usually women or children of either sex. And it usually starts in adolescence once puberty hits. I actually dread to think what kids are up to these days with all the porn and stuff. Now, Colin Pitchfork, his older sister was studying to become a doctor, and his younger brother was doing an engineering degree. Now, Colin left school at 16 with no qualifications, so that tells me that in their household, there was something different about him, whatever that was. He became an apprentice baker at a Hampshire bakery. And apparently he was actually quite good at this. He became quite skilled. Now, he also worked at Bernardo's Children's Charity for 5 years. And here, he played with children with special needs. And he baked cakes in an attempt to win a Gold Duke of Edinburgh award. Now, it was here he met Carol, the woman that he'd marry. They got engaged when he was 21, and he was convicted again of exposing himself to girls. So in May 1981, I'd like to know if Carol knew that he'd just been convicted again of exposing himself, and I'd love to know what he said to her. Because, you know, she seems like a reasonable woman. I know she was young at the time, but still, she must have been thinking, why are you flashing yourself to girls? I'd love to know how that conversation went. So in May 1981, he got married, and Carol was a social worker at the time. Pretty soon, though, he had an affair, and he even took this girl, and she was a girl, to his house he shares with Carol, and had sex with her in their bed. I can't imagine a worse disrespect. Not only are you cheating, but you bring the girl to your wife's home. But Carol stayed with him, and she got pregnant, and she went on to give birth to a son in August 1983. At this time, she was starting to study to become a probation officer. Now, Emma Kenny done a boss video on this probably about 2 years ago now, and she said something that I've heard a few people say. She said that it's weird that every time, I mean, Carol only had the 2 sons, but every time the son was born, he murdered and raped these little girls. And Emma Kenny, she's a psychologist, she was saying that a lot of the time when a woman has a baby, all her focus goes on the baby, and a certain mindset in a man, you know, a disordered man, becomes really aggressive, distant, might have an affair, feels like he's not getting any attention at home, that kind of thing. So I did find that interesting when Emma Kenny said, because I've heard it, can't remember who, American cases with American experts, but I've heard them say the same thing, that the man doesn't get any attention, and, you know, men who are twisted do crazy shit. So on November 21st, remember the baby was born in August, so this is November, he drove Carol to her evening class, and he picked it up at 9 p.m. when the class finished. Now, in between dropping it off and picking it up, he had raped and strangled Linda Mann while his baby was in the car. In the following years, he had other mistresses, and one apparently fell pregnant in 1987, I believe. Or was it, I can't remember what year it was, but he had an affair and she got pregnant, and there was a stillbirth apparently, and that really affected him to some extent. So, like I said, he raped and murdered Linda Mann in 1983, and then in 1986 he raped and murdered Dawn Ashworth. as I said in the beginning, he was the first person to be convicted of DNA technology. Now, let's talk about Linda Mann. She was 15. She lived in Leicestershire, Narborough, and she had a good family. Now, on that November evening in 1983, this case is taught worldwide. She went to visit a friend, just for a few minutes. Now, it's 1983. There's no mobile phones, there's no technology. Most people didn't have a phone in the house. Some people did, we didn't. We always went to like my granddad's if we needed the phone. So she'd went to see a friend for a few minutes, and then she'd left that friend's house and she was travelling to see another friend in Enderby. Now, Linda's mum and dad that night had been to a dart match, and it must have been a thing in the 80s, because my mum and dad my mum used to be on the darts team and they'd go out for like darts nights and stuff. And her mum and dad got home just after midnight. They realised that she hadn't came home, and the parents started searching straight away. And Linda's older sister, when her mum came back, was like, you know, she hasn't been home all night. So they phoned the police about 1:30 in the morning, and it turns out that when Linda had left the first friend's house to travel to Enderby to see the other friend, she never made it to there. So we know that in between leaving one friend's to Enderby, something happened. Now, what she'd done was, there was a shortcut from friend A to friend B, and she took it, and it was along a footpath known as Black Pad. And I've seen on the Crown Watch documentary, and it's so secluded. And I think her dad even said, yeah, we used to tell her never take the shortcut, but you know, we do, especially as kids. You know, we want to get from A to B, see this friend, that friend, get home. We're going to take the shortcut. Now, the three villages of Narborough, Littlethorpe and Enderby was dominated by the Colin Hospital for the mentally disturbed. And at 7 AM the following morning, a hospital porter who was on his way to do a shift, he found Linda's body. Now, I'm going to give some details here, and I'm not being crude or disrespectful, but people need to know what this demon done to this little girl. So I am going to go into a little bit of detail, but it's important. This man is out on the streets. So when the porter found her, she was lying on her back. Her jeans, tights and knickers had been put in a heap a few yards away from her body. There was a scarf knotted around her neck, and there was blood around her nose where he'd hit her to knock her down. She had been raped and semen was collected. The post-mortem found that blow to the face would have made her unconscious straight away. So he basically raped an unconscious child and then strangled her, and then discarded her like she was a piece of shit. Now, when not only did the way he strangled her was he put his knees on her chest and leant on her, and strangled her that way. Now, the police at first thought that it might have been someone from the hospital, the Carlton Hospital, because you know, it was right there. But that was eliminated really quick. Everyone was counted for and stuff like that. Now, that semen was preserved, and at the time, the only technology that the police had was, all they could tell was that he had blood type A, and an enzyme profile which matched only 10% of males, and that's all that they knew. Now, the case grew cold until 3 years later, when another 15-year-old girl was found raped and murdered. Now, 1986, and Dawn Ashworth, she went to the same school as Linda Mann. Obviously, there's 3 years between them. She was found raped and strangled 1 mile from where Linda Mann was, in £10 Lane. Again, another bit of a secluded area. Now, Dawn worked in a newsagent, and she'd spend all wages on fashion magazines, and she was really into like fashion and makeup and doing her hair, and like she just loved it. And I remember being that age, you know, I was obsessed with the magazines and like copying the looks and following the trends and stuff like that. Now, Dawn had agreed to babysit her brother that night so her mum and her dad could go out. At the time, Dawn lived in Enderby, and she was also out visiting a friend. She too took a shortcut, this time along £10 Lane, to go and see a friend. She knocked and a friend weren't there. She'd had plans that night to see this friend. They were going to spend the night together, but because again, the issue with not having phones, because she said she was going to babysit her brother so mum and dad would go out, she's gone to a friend's house to say, look, I can't see you tonight, I've got to babysit. And that's basically all she was doing. Now, the following day, the family were meant to be going on a little family holiday to Norfolk. She was last seen by a friend about 4:15. Not the friend she'd knocked at, another friend. Now, 10 minutes later at 4:25 p.m, on a crowded dual carriageway, this road, I don't like roads, but like she crossed it anyway. So she had crossed the carriageway into Colin Avenue, where her friend Sheila lived, but she went in. Now, at 4:40, she was seen back going the other way across the dual carriageway, and at this point she is 15 minutes from a house. Now, the time of death is said to have been between 5:15 and 5:30, because 2 men outside a radiator works factory had heard screaming around that time. At 5:30, 2 motorists seen a man run across this road coming out from £10 Lane. He ran up the embankment leading to the M1, and he ran across both lanes of the motorway, as you do. A motorcyclist was seen in the area at the time. Now, that is important, this motorcyclist, because there was actually a miscarriage of justice in this case as well, and his name was Buckland. Now, when she failed to return home, the police acted quickly. It took a few days to find Dawn's body. It had been hidden in the undergrowth next to £10 Lane, 1 mile from where Linda Mann's body was found. Again, some horrific details of a 15-year-old child. Warning. But again, you need to know what kind of monster he is. Now, Dawn Ashworth, this 15-year-old kid, was naked from the waist down, and knickers were caught on her right ankle, and a bra had been pushed up, exposing her breasts. She lied on her left side, and there was blood around her private area, and her pubic hair was matted with semen, which again was collected and preserved. She had been beaten around the head and manually strangled. Once again, the case went cold, and the murders became known as the Enderby murders. Now, the MO was the same for both cases. The same blood type, same enzyme, which led police to say, you know, they're looking for the same person. Now, Detective David Baker said that the killer would be in a stable relationship and that he would be a man driven by a sexual fantasy cycle. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about DNA. I'm just having some coffee. So, as far back as 1911, it was accepted that human beings are made up of millions of cells consisting of a protein surrounding a nucleus. This nucleus consists of a substance called nucleic acid. This has two forms: deoxyribose and ribose. Probably pronounced that wrong, I am sorry. Now, in the 1940s, DNA was found to be the magic building blocks of humans. It's like scientists, they knew something but they just couldn't prove it yet, which I think is really really profound. The DNA code was cracked in the 1950s by Francis Crick and James Watson, who won the Nobel Prize. A geneticist at Leicestershire University, Alec Jeffreys, now Sir Alec Jeffreys, he did a failed experiment to see if certain diseases could be passed through family by genetics. He was able to extract DNA from cells. He attached this to a photographic film, left it in a developing tank, and once it was extracted, the film showed a sequence of bars. And every individual whose cells had been used could be ID'd with precision. The technique was at first planned to show kinship. So a lot of the main thing was like paternity. That's what he was using it for. I think there was an immigration case where I think it was a little boy and he had to prove that he was someone's son, so he had the right to stay in the country or something. I might be remembering that wrong. So yeah, I've even wrote it down here. So he published his findings in a journal, and he was assisting in cases involving immigration and British citizenship. And he gave a talk, and at this talk, Alec Jeffreys suggested that it could even be used to identify criminals. And people laughed at him. They were like, yeah, whatever. That could never happen. Now, there was a man called Richard Buckland, and he confessed to the murder of Dawn Ashworth, but he wouldn't confess to the murder of Linda Mann. Now, the police knew that the killer of Dawn had to have killed Linda as well. So Alec Jeffreys was passed the semen samples to see if he could do something, and he tested it against Richard Buckland's blood, and Jeffrey could see that the police were right and that it was the same rapist as each other, but that it weren't Buckland. And the test was done 3 times, and every time the results were the same. So Richard Buckland spent 3 months on remand, and he was finally released from prison, and he was the first man to be cleared using DNA. Pardon me. Now today we've got like the Innocence Projects and stuff like that, and you know, DNA is being used all the time to prove that somebody didn't do a crime. I just think DNA, the discovery, the technique of DNA is just an absolute godsend. I really do. Now, the police, I'll give them the due. They were determined to find the killer and the rapist of these little girls. So they set up voluntary screening of every male born between 1953 and 1970 who had lived or worked in Narborough. Now, the test was just a blood test, and every man, they all got a letter saying, you know, come and get your blood done so we can, you know, exclude you. 2 test centres were set up, one in the school and one in the council office, and 3 days a week there was 2 sessions, one in the morning and one in the evening, and each man was told to bring a form of ID. Now, some men were suspects of the police, but you know, they were easy to change their minds. By the first month, 1,000 men had volunteered to give a sample, and after 8 months, 5,511 men had gave one. This was huge. This had never been done before. It must have cost the police a fortune. Now, out of them, you know, thousands of men, no match was found. And the National Council of Civil Liberties, now called Liberty, was campaigning about the mass screening of people. You know, they were concerned about people having their blood on record. Among those recorded was 27-year-old baker Colin Pitchfork, married father of 2. He'd been spoken to 3 years before. So this is after Linda's murder. The police go and speak to him. And the night Linda was murdered, he had told police that he was babysitting the baby because his wife obviously had the class. A year later, in August 1987, a workmate of Colin Pitchfork, Ian Kelly, was having a few pints with mates in the pub. Now, Kelly confessed that he had taken the test for Colin Pitchfork because Colin Pitchfork had already done it for someone else. Now, Colin Pitchfork had doctored his passport and had driven Kelly to the test centre and waited, and he'd paid him a few £100. Now, a few £100 in 1987 was a lot. And 6 weeks later, one of Kelly's friends called the police. Now, I don't know why this friend waited 6 weeks to phone the police, but anyway, this friend of Ian Kelly's phones the police and says basically what he'd been told, that you know, Colin Pitchfork didn't do the test. And later that day, Colin Pitchfork was arrested. DNA proved that it was him who raped and murdered Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. When asked by the police, you know, why he just seems so indifferent to human life. He basically said, one murder or two, the sentence is the same. These girls were absolutely just objects to him, to sexually gratify himself, because he's a selfish monster. QC Brian Escort Clark said he showed a complete lack of remorse, and he was given 30 years. Now, I think Ian Kelly was given 2 years for obviously perverting the course of justice and taking the test for Colin Pitchfork. Now, May 14, 2009, 21 years later, Pitchfork, now aged 48, he appealed to the Court of Appeal in London, and he won a 2-year reduction in his sentence. And they said that he was eligible for release in 2016. He was then released in September 2021. Or they said that he could be released. I think he got out in November. Now, he pled guilty in 1988 to the rapes and murder, and the judge sentenced him to life. And the judge said the killings were sadistic, and he doubted Pitchfork could ever be released, and he described him as a danger to women. Oh yeah, so Ian Kelly, he got done for perverting the course of justice. He got 18 months suspended for 2 years. That's what he got. Now, there's rumours that there could have been a potential third victim who was attacked, and but she didn't come forward, and it didn't really go anywhere. Now, Colin Pitchfork was first released in November 2021. After less than 2 months being out, he was recalled. He was accused of approaching women in a park, but then it came out 18 months later or something, a ridiculous amount of time, that as part of his job or something, he was picking up litter in the area. Now, I think two things can be true at once. I really do. I've probably written it down somewhere, but his conditions, I think he had something like 30 odd different conditions. Now, that is probably the most I've ever seen someone get released. Usually, you know, some people might be released with like a curfew, or they're not allowed in a certain area, or they've got to do mandatory counselling or stuff like that. But he had like a lot of conditions on his release, which to me says they think he's a danger. Give them the due, they were watching him closely, and as soon as he was getting a bit iffy and suspicious, they recalled him. But the parole board is insane. Like I described to you then, what he done to these 2 little girls is unbelievable. And the fact that he's out. He should never have left the prison alive. He killed 2 little girls. I don't get it. I don't get our justice system one bit. It pisses me off. Yeah, so for 18 months, politicians, it was even mentioned in the House of Commons, you know, that they want answers. The families were saying, you know, because I think when he was recalled, I think there was a time period of maybe either 6 weeks or 12 weeks where they have to make a decision on what they're doing, and they wouldn't say anything. And then politicians got involved and saying, listen, you need to tell us what you're doing. And it went until 18 months later when he was released, and he's got a girlfriend, and this girlfriend is insane, because what type of woman wants to get with a man who has raped and murdered 2 children? What type of woman is that? So she was all for going to the meetings and that, saying, oh, he's, you know, he's a changed man and blah, 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 blah. And she supported his release for whatever, I don't know, whatever reason. So, oh, he had 40, when he was, sorry, I'm all over the place. When he was released in, my notes are everywhere, in November 2021, he had 40 conditions on his licence that he had to abide by. 40. That is so many. That to me says, we don't trust you yet. Now, he was living at a bail hostel and the staff there were starting to get concerned about his behaviour. And yeah, they said that he was going to remain under supervision for the rest of his life, which I hope is true. Oh, sorry, the parole board had 28 days to decide what to do with him, and they ignored everyone for 18 months, which is against the rules. And there's usually a full hearing, but this case just didn't go that way. So he was retained until 2023. Now, the Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, and Alberto Costa MP, they were campaigning to stop his release. Give them the due. Back in July, the Ministry of Justice said he wouldn't have to sign the sex offenders register because his crime predated the legislation. So this monster who raped 2 children doesn't have to sign the sex offenders register. So that means he can legally probably be by schools, live near schools. The parole board is an absolute failure. Now, the former detective David Baker called him a remorseless psychopath who fooled the parole board and he fell for it. That was his opinion. And he said, you know, he was approaching young ladies when they were taking walks. Seeing if there's anything else. Yeah, I mean, the girls' families are convinced he's going to hurt someone else. We haven't heard anything from him yet. But it worries me that he doesn't have to sign the sex offenders register when he is a convicted rapist, a child rapist, and an exhibitionist. You know, going back, I think he's 62 now or 63. You know, this goes back to when he was 14. Now, he was only caught when he was 14. God knows how long he'd been doing it in the meantime. Yeah, so that's the Colin Pitchfork case. I know it was a bit up and downy, but I wanted to try and include everything. So whatever you're doing today, have a good day, and I'll see you in my next one. Ta-da.